Here we're going to take a look at an example problem that involves a frequency table. The data for this table represents the lengths in feet of 25 of the longest bridges in the United States. All right, and then the question is asking us, based on this frequency table, how many intervals did Jamie use? Conveniently, this is a multiple choice question, so the quickest way to determine the answer would be to check each answer choice until we arrive at one that makes sense. So first I'm going to look at the two intervals that are already in the frequency table. It tells us the first interval and it tells us the last one. Essentially what we can do is, since the data is in order, notice how it starts from least and then it goes in columns all the way up to the greatest length for the bridge. We can group the first 7 pieces of data for our first interval, and we can group the last 2. Essentially what this would look like then is, since it says that there are 7 pieces of data in the first interval, let's group those first 7 together. So there's 5 in the first column, and then there's 2 more in the second column. And then for the last interval, that has 2 pieces of data. So working from the end of the last end of the data, these 2 data points are in that final interval. In a histogram, what this would essentially look like is we would have some, first interval here, right? And it would go up to a frequency of 7. So that would be, a bar that goes up to 7. And then in our last interval, we don't know how many are spaced in between, right? There could be 4, 5, 6, 7 intervals. So whatever that last interval is, that one's going to go up to a frequency of 2. So something like this, all right? Now, I think now is a good time to start double checking the answer choices, because this might be enough to figure out what the answer is. So let's just start with A. It says that 4 intervals of 1,000 feet. Okay, so if the first interval was 1,000 feet, right, the first of 4, that would mean that we would start at 1,000 and increase another 1,000, which would be up to 1,999. The next interval would start with the 2,000. If this were the case, let's look at our data and see if there's 7 pieces of data within that range of numbers. So from 1,000 to essentially 2,000 would give us all of these data points are in that first interval, which is way more than we want. This is 15 data points and we only want 7. So an interval of 1,000 feet is too large. Okay, so what that does is that eliminates answer choice A, because we know that 1,000-foot intervals are too big, and it also eliminates answer choice B because the same problem would happen. So let's try intervals of 500 feet. It's probably going to be one of these two, and let's just double check. So that would make the end of the interval stop at 1,499, right? So now this is an interval that is 500 units wide. And so then if we look at our data, we need any data points that are between 1,000 and 1,500, which is exactly the 7 that we've already marked, which confirms that intervals of 500 is what we want. So our answer is going to be either C or D. Now we just have to figure out whether there's 6 intervals or 7 intervals. And the best way to do this would be just to list out all the intervals until we get to the last one. So the last one we would need would be from 4,000 to 4,500, and if we list all of the ones in between, then we can just count up whether there's 6 or 7 of them. Conveniently, I've actually already listed out the intervals starting at 1,000, and so we can just double check that we have all of them here. So we need to start at 1,000, right, because our data starts at 1,000, and then we need to end after 4,200. So you'll notice that I've gone up by 500. So 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, and then the last one is the one that has the 4,000 to 4,500. So let's just count them up. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 intervals. So that means that the best choice here would be to use 7 intervals of 500 feet, so that way all of our data is included. We can also double check to make sure that this makes sense by actually putting the data into these intervals. So the second interval, which goes up to 2000, would include all of this data here. So that's our second interval. All right, then our third interval would go from 2000 to 2500, which is these 5 data points. The next one goes from 2500 all the way up to 3000, so that's just one piece of data. All right, and then the next one doesn't have any data in it at all. So that's something that I want to point out, that this interval right here from 3000 to 3499 has 0 data. But we still would put the interval. It would just be an interval with no bar in the histogram. And then the next one, 3500 to 3999, and then the final one in blue that we already have graphed. So if we counted these up, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. The missing one is 5, 6, and 7 intervals, which confirms that answer choice D is the correct answer. That's all for today. Make sure to like and subscribe.